Alors, bonjour et bienvenue à nouveau virtuellement de Montréal à cette deuxième journée du Forum annuel sur les politiques migratoires, l'impact de la COVID-19 sur la migration et les frontières au Canada, aux États-Unis et au Mexique, présenté par Metropolis, Amérique du Nord. Je suis David Heurtel, coprésident Canada de ce magnifique événement. Welcome. I'm David Heurtel. I am a co-chair from Canada, speaking to you virtually from Montreal. I'm so happy to be here for this second day of our Migration Policy Annual Forum presented by Metropolis North America. COVID-19's impact on migration and borders in Canada, the USA, and Mexico. I'm happy to be joined today by our US co-chair, Ann Richards. Good to be with you, Ann.
Great to be here.
Maybe we can start with maybe a little quick discussion about the situation right now. Everybody's talking, of course, about the border being closed between Canada and the US. There's a lot of pressure from the Canadian side economically to reopen. A lot of businesses, tourism, obviously want to get back on track. Also, there's a big issue regarding migration because Canada's agriculture sector depends massively on migration, and the border being closed is preventing that migration from getting to all the agriculture sites across the country. But at the same time, the Canadian government is saying, well, we're not in any hurry to reopen. There was a joint announcement by both governments saying the border would still be closed at least until July 21st. On the Canadian side, we know that the federal government is most probably heading towards an election, so there's a lot of politics involved here. The fact is also that the latest polling, and the polling from our friend Jack Jedwab at the Association for Canadian Studies, the regular tracking poll, shows that clearly over 60%, even over 65% of Canadians are in no hurry to see the border reopen, and that is definitely a signal from the political side that they are looking at that statistic very carefully. But also there are scares about a variant. We're talking about the Delta, but other variants. And the government here in Canada said, well, we're not going to reopen until we hit that magic number of 75% of the population being vaccinated. And we're not going to see that anytime soon. At the earliest we can hope for hitting that number is 75%. So while there is a lot of pressure, at the same time, from a Canadian perspective, we're not seeing this as necessarily the number one issue being discussed right now. While vaccines is being discussed right now, even if you're looking at what's going on, really, people are talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs more than anything else, and the US team beating our Montreal Canadiens last night. But the idea here is more seriously to look at there is mounting pressure and on reopening the borders, because the migration issue is primarily one of importance. We have labor shortages not only in the agricultural sector here in Canada. We have labor shortages in a lot of different key strategic sectors, and our economy needs that labor force to start the economic recovery that everybody's hoping for, as we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here with COVID. So from your perspective, Ann, I'm wondering how you're seeing this border closing issue from the US's side.
Well, thank you, David, for kicking us off. And thanks to the Metropolis team for asking me to co-chair with David and Gustavo. I'm in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. this morning. And I can tell you that the border with Canada is not a top tier issue in Washington, D.C. As we will shortly hear from a panel of mayors from both sides of the northern border, it is a top tier issue if you live close to the border. But what's been on the minds of people in Washington, D.C., at the White House and in Congress, first and foremost, with the start of the new Biden administration, has been the pandemic. And so the administration has been very forceful in pushing to get Americans vaccinated, to get vaccines out into arms. We're seeing, good rates of success of vaccines getting out to those Americans who want to be vaccinated. And there's still very resistant pockets of Americans around the United States who are not interested and don't necessarily believe that the pandemic will affect them, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Because the Biden administration made a big push on that early, we're now also seeing a push on the fixing the or addressing the economic impact of the pandemic. And so this is something I think Canadians and Americans would have in common. For the White House, it's getting people back to work. In March, the Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan, and it also includes a child tax credit payments to families that need money. And so there's a lot of activity in these early days of the administration. Now there's a lot of discussion and deal making on infrastructure. The collapse of a building in Miami, Surfside neighborhood of Miami Beach, shows the tremendous loss that can occur when infrastructure is not maintained and kept up and built right in the first place. And of course, in the foreign policy arena, a big issue is what to do about China. And then we saw the president involved in the G7 meetings, and in his meeting with your prime minister, there was a discussion of the border. So that's where the border finally came, the northern border came up in a discussion that the president had. The top issue for Republicans who are on the attack and trying to, knock a little of the wind out of the sails of the new administration is the southwest border. And fixing our asylum system, addressing a whole range of immigration-related issues is something that will take a lot of time. And it's not something that can be done overnight. And even though there are some very talented people who've been brought in to run different aspects of this in the White House, or Alejandro Mayorkas, who's very experienced, it is himself a refugee from a refugee family at the Department of Homeland Security, we know that this is going to take a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And it's not just to modernize what has gone badly out of shape in the last decades. It's also then undoing some of the things that the Trump administration did, because the Trump administration and President Trump's top counselor, Stephen Miller, really wanted to reduce the number of foreign-born people coming into the United States, and were very successful in the things that they were doing to limit the numbers coming in. President Trump's use of Title 42, a public health measure, to stop border crossers who are migrants without visas, and that includes asylum seekers, is still in use by the Biden administration and is a point of unhappiness for pro-asylum, pro-immigration advocates. And President Biden was heavily criticized for announcing that he'd be sticking with the Trump refugee resettlement ceiling, 15,000 refugees resettled in a year, before making a flip-flop on refugee resettlement numbers and going back to a more ambitious 62,500 earlier this year. The administration also still needs to appoint people to senior offices. They've got a whole cabinet, but they don't have necessarily assistant secretaries and undersecretaries in place. Those people, who, even if they've been named, they still have to be confirmed by the US Senate. So for all of these reasons, what's considered, I think, a temporary inconvenience for most of the United States at the northern border has been tolerated. But as I say, we'll shortly hear from border mayors about why this is more than just an inconvenience. This is something that really gets at the lifeblood of the relationship along the border.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And before I forget, I want to remind people with us that French and Spanish translations are available if you go into the chat window of this conference. Do we have our Mexican co-chair with us? Is Gustavo Mohar with us? I do not see him. No, we do not. Okay, so we were going to have a word from our Mexican co-chair, so we hope to hear from him a bit later. Anne, if you don't mind, I would throw it over to you for our first panel with those border mayors you were talking about.
I'm very eager to get to this panel, having spoken to some of these mayors ahead of time. I think they have a lot on their minds and a lot to share with our audience. So if I could ask the Metropolis team then to turn on the cameras. And I think now all of the mayors have their correct names in front of them. And then we also need Mayor Diodati is coming on board in a moment. I want to welcome you. You are the busiest people I know on both sides of the border. And I know our audience is keenly interested in hearing from you all. I think we will start with Mayor Dilkens of Windsor, Ontario. What we're interested in hearing, Mr. Mayor, is how this border closure, which is only a partial closure, because business enterprises can go back and forth, National Hockey League teams can go back and forth, Alaskans apparently can go back and forth, but not family, relatives, friends who are used to sort of going for leisure or shopping or access to airports can go. I wanted to tell our audience that the distance from Windsor to Niagara Falls, Ontario is about 237 miles. And then we cross over, we'll have the mayor from Niagara Falls, US speaking. And the distance from Niagara Falls to Plattsburgh, where Mayor Chris Rosenquest, is about 400 miles or 623 kilometers by road. So we've got them spread out along this important seaway, telling us what it's like for them. So without further ado, let's hear from Mayor Dilkens of Windsor.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. Great to be with everyone today, and to my fellow mayors, great to see you all. My good friend Jim Diodati up in Niagara Falls, great to see you, Jim. And although we're separated by a couple hundred miles between Windsor and Niagara Falls, I can tell you, as I look out my window here from my office at City Hall, from here to the city of Detroit is no more than 2 miles away. And so this border closure for us feels, even though it's a partial closure, it feels for people here like an absolute complete shutdown, because Detroit and the nature of our geography has made it such that Detroit is an extension of our backyard. And one of the best selling features of my community, if I was to talk to someone who had never been here, is that we have all of the elements of sort of this safe Canadian city, with all of the major amenities that you would find in any major urban center, whether it's theater, sports, arts, dining. All of those things are literally available 2 miles away. And for perspective, if you were here in my office and it's approaching lunchtime and I wanted to take you to my favorite Thai restaurant in Detroit, if you had a Nexus card, we can get from City Hall to that restaurant in Eastern Market in Detroit in 9 minutes, door to door. So from our perspective, this is a place where we just go for lunch. It's that close. And so from a city of Windsor perspective, we are the automotive capital of Canada. Our largest employer is Stellantis, so all of the Chrysler Pacifica minivans sold around the world are made here. We're also home to North America's largest distillery, Hiram Walker and Sons, who has made Canadian Club for over 160 years, shipped it around the world. And our whole tool, die, and mold sector is one of the largest in North America, in fact, one of the largest in the world. And all of the supply chains that are built up are literally built up on both sides of the border. And the best example that I can give is that the parts that go into a vehicle before it rolls off the assembly line cross the border on average 6 times before it rolls across the assembly line. And that speaks to the nature of the supply chain and the integration of the supply chain between Windsor and Detroit, who are respectively our automotive capitals of our countries. And so on the business side, it is difficult when you can't have business people continue to build their book of business, which in some cases lead times are 6 months, 1 year, up to 2 years in the tool, die, and mold sector. And so during the COVID pandemic, the books of business were full. None of us expected it to happen the way that it did. And they were able to keep people employed, keep the lights on because they had a book of business that was built and lasted them through the pandemic. They're now at the point where they're ringing the alarm bells to me and to the Prime Minister and others saying, you have to get this border open. No longer is it acceptable for us to not be considered essential. There are a lot of mouths that won't be fed if we can't continue to get business on the other side of the border. And so that's what it's like from a business perspective because of the geography and the proximity. But on a family side, you know, I never thought, and having lived here my entire life, I always just intuitively understood the border as part of the makeup of my community. But I never truly understood the deep family impacts and the deep family ties that exist until the border was closed. And this is not, you know, I worked at our Canadian consulate in Detroit during 9/11 when the border was closed for about a day. And that was sort of, you know, apocalyptic, that we would close the border for a day, and never before until the riots in Detroit in 1967 had you seen a closure of the border. This is the longest recorded closure in history of the US-Canada border. And on the family side, I never estimated the number of hardships that could be created. And it's all the simple things from, you know, the birth of the first grandchild and wanting to be there to support your kids, who, you know, on the other side of the border, to obviously funerals, you know, where you can't cross to go to the funeral of your brother or, you know, your parents in some cases. And then every micro issue. If I have read 100 emails, I've read 1,000 from people who are impacted, and not just in Windsor, Essex, across the country. I'm getting emails from people in Detroit who are saying, how do I get into Canada? Because here's the situation. And I haven't found one of those 1,000 emails to be disingenuous, a stretch of the truth, or some fabrication in order to try and circumvent the rules. They're all completely legitimate. And they speak to the relationships that have been built on both sides of the border, in our case, because of geography. And I'll give you an example. And my brother, I have 2 older brothers. My one brother went to college in Michigan after high school, graduated from college in Michigan, met a girl there, married her, and they've lived in Michigan for 30 years and raised their 2 kids. And my niece last summer was getting married. She was going to get married in June. The border was closed. We couldn't get across. She says, you know, I'm going to move it to August. We all thought it would be open by August. And so she moved it to August, but she put the caveat on and said, listen, if the border's not open, I'm still going to get married. And so my mom and dad in their late 70s, my mom said, to heck with this. I am not going to miss the wedding of my granddaughter. And so my mom and dad, instead of driving from Windsor to Detroit, they could have got to my brother's house in about 35 minutes over the border from their house. My mom and dad flew from Windsor to Toronto, a connection from Toronto to Montreal back to Detroit, so they could get into the United States because arrival by air is permitted. They get into the United States. My brother picked them up at the airport. They attended the wedding, spent a few days over there, and then they reversed that trip to come back to Canada, so she didn't miss the wedding of her granddaughter. And so there are 1,000 examples like this. That's just one for my family, but they exist everywhere. They exist on the business side. They exist on the side. And I can tell you, I've never seen anything like this, but the ongoing closure of the border has a deep impact on the community. And every day, despite the closure to everyone except essential travel, we have about 1,200 people who live in my community who cross the border to work in healthcare. And so we get the stories. And when times were bad, they were they were deeply impacted when times were bad, when it was a hot spot. COVID had Michigan was a hot spot for COVID. Those folks were vilified when they came back as if they were the vector for the spread of the disease, bringing it into Canada. even though they wore the same PPE and took the same precautions on both sides of the border. And now, they're over there saying, Drew, you've got to do something. We have a shortage of vaccine in Canada. We certainly did a few weeks ago. And you got to do something. We are throwing doses in the garbage. And so they had the numbers. They said Michigan threw 35,000 doses of vaccine in the garbage. And we're saying, how do we get this into the arms of waiting Canadians? Why would we let that expire when we have the shared goal to inoculate everyone and get this border open, reunite families on both sides, get business back going, and get our economies back to whatever the new normal looks like. So it's been a real interesting experience, and certainly one, I won't reflect on this as among the best years of my life, but it will be one that I remember for the rest of my life. I can assure you of that. And I feel, as challenging as it's been, and I'm sure my mayor colleagues would concur, as challenging as it's been, I really appreciate my community more today than I did before, because I've never seen the spirit of cooperation and collaboration like I've seen in the last 15 months.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dilkens, for kicking us off and for illustrating the dilemma that you're facing. I want to remind our audience of academics, researchers, and policymakers that you can use the Q&A function to start to tee up some questions that we will then put to this panel of very distinguished mayors before the end of the session. We're now going to turn to New York State and Mayor Restaino of Niagara Falls. Mr. Mayor, I have my I Love New York roadmap, so I know exactly where you are. And I've also brought my Made of the Mist protective covering for going onto the falls, which I think may have just outed me on which side of the falls I visited from. So the same question to you then is, how is this pandemic and these confusing, I think I'm willing to say that they're confusing rules based on Mayor Dilkens' otherwise very clear description of them, how is this affecting folks in the in Western New York area?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And I have to say that Mayor Dilkens really nailed it from the perspective of being a border mayor with a municipality just, a football throw away, that you really become part of the same neighborhood. So I don't have much to add in terms of the technical piece. Mayor Dilkens and his beautiful city of Windsor that I've spent some great time in really nailed it on that. But what I guess from our perspective here in Niagara Falls, New York State specifically, we have been pushing very, very hard to increase the number of vaccinated residents of the state of New York as much as many other states have tried. And I think we're accomplishing that. We have now well over 50% of our entire state population fully vaccinated, moving into the 60, 70% in terms of those getting their first shot. And we have all of the help wanted and job openings available that I know many of our Canadian neighbors they'd be happy to fill in those jobs, and they've done it in the past. So we have an economy that's very interwoven. Mayor Diodati and I have spoken about this in a couple of different forums and a couple of different opportunities. For me, and I suspect that he shares this, for me, it's really like cutting off a neighborhood. Mayor Dilkens really nailed it, talking about families being separated and those personal things that you took for granted that you now realize are special. I have family that live throughout the rest of the United States. And when they visit here, my nieces and nephews look at the opportunity to go to Canada like I may look at the opportunity to go to Europe, because they don't really see, I don't see it that way. And those of us who are born and raised in a border city and have been here our whole lives, going to Niagara Falls, Ontario would be the same as going to the west side of the city. And so for us, this has really been, as Mayor Dilkens indicated, something that I certainly won't forget, I don't know the extent of my other fellow mayors' terms. I know Mayor Diodati has some years under his belt. I need you to know that I started here January of 2020. So I've known nothing but this catastrophe for the entire 18 months I've been here. So I suppose I'm waiting for that point, Mayor, when we get to this not being here, so I could say, wow, is this what this is really like? But my position has always been, we have these categories of essential workers and we are incentivizing vaccines. In New York State, we have our Excelsior Pass. We have technology that gets us to go back and forth and can verify who has received their full vaccines. I'm signed on to my Arrive Canada Pass. I can't wait for when this gets updated. I'm ready to go. I guess what I'm saying is we have technology. We have the ability, I think, to start broadening those categories of individuals that can travel back and forth. And I think I would simply invite both federal governments to take a good, long, hard look at expanding those categories in order to be able to avoid some of these really difficult situations, not just with, as Mayor Dilkens indicated, supply chain and business growth, but the human cost, the family cost associated with this border being closed for so long. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts. I think that you'll likely hear similar commentary. But again, for me, I'm looking to July 21st with great anticipation, because I do believe that we have the capacity to broaden the travelers that should be able to pass. And so I have my fingers crossed that Mayor Diodati and I will be sharing that glass of champagne on the Rainbow Bridge about a month from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Restaino. And I'd like to turn to Mayor Diodati. We'll hop over the Niagara Falls and we'll turn to Mayor Diodati, who's in Niagara Falls, Ontario, to hear from you, sir, about how you see the situation. Take it away.
Thanks, Ann. And, I'm going to echo a lot of what my esteemed mayors have been saying. My good buddy, Robert in Niagara Falls, New York, and he's exactly right. We see it as one big city divided by a river. And it's funny, when I travel in the US, so many people don't realize there are two Niagara Falls. And I remember not long ago, I was in Atlanta and someone said, well, aren't you Canadian? I said, I am. And they said, well, how can you be the mayor of Niagara Falls? And I said, I'm the mayor of Niagara Falls, Canada. Oh, I didn't realize that there were two Niagara Falls. So it's a common misunderstanding for somebody that's not from the area. And he's exactly right. We've got the CanPass federal program where we could track our vaccinations. The technology is there now more than ever. There's nothing but excuses standing in the way from us opening up the border. And I think Mayor Dilkens nailed it too. My good buddy Drew, that going across the border is a way of life. I grew up in this town. I remember when you didn't carry ID to cross the border. And it wasn't until after 9/11, you had to carry a passport. And, some people have said, what a pain, you've got to have these apps. And I said, even if I bring my dog across, I have to bring his vaccination papers to show that he's been vaccinated against rabies. I said, it's a minor irritant and it's a short-term inconvenience, but we can get past it. And I appreciate Mary Restaino saying it's a football throw. That's got to be a Josh Allen football throw to make it. It's a bit farther than I can throw it. But I know we had John Daly one day here golfing, shooting balls across to the other side. And we do things together collectively, Mayor Restaino and on our side, collectively, we get upwards of 20 million tourists here every year. We're within a day's drive of half the population of North America. And I got to tell you, how does it affect Niagara Falls, Canada? Well, tourism is pretty important for us. And I say it's right up there with oxygen. And typically 25% of our tourists come from the US and they represent 50% of the revenue because the Americans spend large and we love their greenback. And we are waiting to roll out the red carpet for those visits. So the longer it takes, the more it hurts us. And Mayor Dilkens is right. And I remember during 9/11, because it's ironic, that's the day one of my kids was born, the day those planes crashed into the trade towers and it impacted so many of us in so many ways. My daughter was born 9/11. So that day, I get reminded of it, and every time I look at my daughter. And that was the first day the borders were shut down. And it was a real odd and eerie feeling because families were cut off. A lot of my family is American, from Western New York and throughout Seattle. And matter of fact, one of my nephews is playing baseball for Alabama, University of Alabama. And right now he's in Cape Cod playing summer ball. And we're hoping to go down. As a matter of fact, I'm an optimist and I always see the cup as half full. My dad and I, my son, and one of my cousins, we've already booked a trip to go down to Boston and watch my nephew. And this is for the 25th of July. I know it's cutting it close. So we've got everything booked. Even ironically, the Bo Sox are playing the Blue Jays in Boston at Fenway. So we're looking forward to seeing that game. So everything's booked. I said to my dad, Dad, we can always cancel. And but I'm optimistic. We're going to all be doubly vaccinated, fully vaccinated, ready to go, doing our part. So they can't use excuses, further excuses. And that's what it's been, excuses. And I can say, there's no mayor in Canada doing more efforts to open the border than Mayor Dilkens. That guy has been on every major national media, everything, and international. He's been on every panel, beating the drum. He's done such a service to the community of Windsor and Southern Ontario to open it up. And with us too, it's split families. A lot of people don't realize along the Lake Erie northern coastline here in Niagara, 43% of the properties are owned by Americans, 43%. And does it affect them? Of course. And a lot of Canadians own property in Western New York, in Ellicottville and the South Towns. They like to go skiing and they have chalets. And I've got my favorite restaurants too. I know Mayor Dilkens has not extended that invitation to me, Anne, like he extended to you about his favorite Thai restaurant, but I hope he will eventually get the hint. But even when I remember I'd visit my friends in Windsor and they'd say, we're going over the river. And I'd laugh because that's the language we use, going over the river, or over the ditch, or OTR. And when I was there, and we'd go to Greektown and go visit some of the amenities in Detroit. And I remember I said, that's what we say here with Niagara Falls, New York, and Buffalo. And it's been said, it's easier to fly to Paris than to drive to Buffalo. So the Toronto Blue Jays, Canada's boys of summer, are playing in Salem Field in downtown Buffalo. And I can't even go watch them unless I decide to drive to Toronto and fly to Buffalo. Well, then I can do it. But I can't drive there. And for me, it's a 25-minute drive and I can't do it. Or my favorite wing and pizza place in Niagara Falls, New York. I've got a few favorites. Sammy's is one of them. And I've got some of my favorite spots we've been going to forever and a day. And we can't go over there. It frustrates the heck out of us. I can't visit my family. I can't let Mayor Restaino buy me that beer he's been promising me for the last year. And there's so many reasons. So I'm going to tell you, I'm holding out hope that, and based on my discussions with a number of senators and congressmen, and they're all pushing for the same thing. Matter of fact, one congressman I was talking to is married to a woman from Kitchener here in Ontario, and they've got a family cottage in Niagara, and they haven't been over to for a year and a half. And my last trip, Anne, was March of 2020, and I had gone to Washington. And this was around the Great Lakes Cities Initiative. We met with dozens of congressmen and senators around the Great Lakes. I never realized that was going to be my last trip as I came back. And I can't tell you, like these guys, I thought it was going to be a few more months and we're going to get back to life as we know it. And it hasn't happened. So we need to keep up the pressure. So based on my discussions with some of our American counterparts, I think the risk to us is that the Americans will open up unilaterally. And in a way, I hope they do. And the downside for us is that then Canadians will go spend their money in the US and we won't have access to that same kind of reciprocal spending. And maybe that's what it's going to take. I think it's political reasons that things haven't opened up because our health panel has recommended the way that we can safely open up, certainly at the very least for fully vaccinated people initially. But right now it's very, very frustrating for us to sit. And I watch Mayor Restaino's Maids of the Mist going up and down the river, full capacity. And we just put our horn blowers out of the dry docks and into the river last week. They're still not running until Canada Day, July the 1st. And they'll only be allowed 175 people on a boat that can hold 700. So when I look, I can't help but shake my head and say, we've all been following the protocols. We've all done what we're supposed to do. At what point do we start getting things back to normal? At what point do we start relaxing things and rewarding people for doing all the right things? So I'm proud to be on this panel and I look forward to Chris becoming part of our circle of friends as well, and hopefully we'll connect, and maybe he'll come for that beer that we have at Mayor Restaino's office, or that Thai restaurant at Mayor Dilkens' office.
Don't get carried away now. Don't get carried away. We'll just try to get neighbors to talk to each other. Thank you very much, Mayor Diodati. I want to remind all the folks on the listening to this webinar that we are looking forward to your questions and answers, and you can use the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of the screen on some I think it's Windows-based Zoom setups, and there's also it's at the top of the screen on my iPad, I know. So we're really eager to hear from you all. If you have questions or if you have comments about how this is affecting you, some illustrations that are perhaps different than what we've heard so far. Without further ado, we'll head northeast then to the great city of Plattsburgh, New York, and Plattsburgh native, Mayor Chris Rosenquest is going to talk to us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Chris Rosenquest. Je suis le maire de Plattsburgh, New York. Thank you for having me. I sincerely appreciate being here. Plattsburgh is well noted to be Montreal's U.S. suburb. And there's a reason for that. We have a lot of Montreal visitors come to Plattsburgh. We have one of the largest freshwater beaches in the U.S. We have a international airport that we have seen certainly over the last year, where we would normally see the airport parking lot to full capacity with a lot of our Quebec license plates fill that parking lot. We see very few license plates out there now. But I share the same sentiment with my partners on this call, that a lot of the frustration is the inconsistency of the rules, the uncertainty of the future, and then also what seems to be a hyper political position on opening our border. You know, again, our family lives across the border, our neighbors live across the border, employees and employers share our border. And one thing that as a border community, fortunately for us, we measure the economic impact of that tourism dollar through sales tax as an indicator, and occupancy tax that our hotels charge for hotel stays. And we've seen a significant dip in occupancy tax, but our sales tax has been pretty level. But again, it's a matter of how do we facilitate that border opening. I know Mayor Dilkens acknowledged part of our concern as well. It's that vaccination sharing. We have a lot of vaccinations available. There's a lot of essential workers that cross our border that we want to share these things. We have one of the highest first round vaccination rates in the U.S. and the lowest infection rates in the U.S. as well in New York State. And we rely on the science at this point. We rely on the science to say you're vaccinated and you're safe. And even if you're around other unvaccinated and even infected people that have COVID, you're still safe. And so we do continue to rely on that science, and we look to our federal governments to do the same. Short of that, I was also thinking about the last time I was in Montreal. I like to go to the Spa Nordique and my favorite restaurants, and quite honestly, Mayor Diodati, I don't remember the last time I was in Montreal. It was well over a year and a half ago, and I'm really looking forward to this border opening. Besides the economic impact and the business impact, there's a cultural exchange that we lose out on. I do speak a little bit of French, and now it's getting really rusty because I'm not in Montreal sharing that cultural exchange with my friends, which I have plenty of in Montreal, and they're not coming down to share our opportunities. We have a fantastic summertime here in the North Country. We have a fantastic winter time as well. Don't want people to shy away from visiting us in the winter, but there is a cultural exchange that we miss out on. And so fundamentally, we do want this border to open, regardless of the economic impact that we've seen, for a number of reasons, including that familial and neighbor cultural exchange. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'd like to ask all of you looking ahead then, what happens on July 21st? Are we ready for this? Is that too soon enough? And you know, that how has that been negotiated? Is it possible the US would open first and Canada would not be receptive to that? I'm sort of wondering who decides. And you know, it sounds like for you all, you'd be happy to have the border open today. But tell me about getting ready for July 21st. Mayor Dilkens, can you lead off?
Yeah, I think that the most likely pathway you'll see is a smoother pathway for those who are fully vaccinated. And I think that's probably very reasonable, as at least on the Canadian side, we work diligently to try and get everyone a first shot and then their second shot. And we're doing a pretty decent job at it. It's just, it's work, right? I mean, you're talking about tens of millions of people and getting shots into arm. It's just going to be a function of time before that work is done. And so, you know, I would expect there'll be an easier pathway for those who are fully vaccinated. You know, hopefully they can find what Minister Bill Blair, talked to Jim and I about was symmetry at the border, because then it would at least be understandable and more easily communicated to folks in both countries what needs to happen, what's the appropriate pathway to enter Canada or the United States. If one tries to go it alone, it would certainly be very interesting, but I think it would be fraught with a whole bunch of challenges with the general public not quite understanding what the rules are, you know, and I could just see the issues in play. And I go back to the simple issue from just a few weeks ago, where our government said it's okay to enter the United States for the purposes of vaccination and come back quarantine free if you have a letter from a physician in Ontario saying, or in physician in Canada, saying you need to seek medical treatment, and then get a letter from a physician or healthcare practitioner in the United States saying you received the treatment, that you could be exempt from quarantine. And 2 days later, they quickly amended that to match US policy, which was, no, you can't enter the United States for the purpose of vaccination. But in the intervening day, what we saw here were 9 people that had attempted to cross, only 9 that attempted to cross thinking that they were okay. They got turned back by US Customs. But of course, most of us, you know, if you've ever crossed the border with frequency, at some point you get pulled into secondary, and at some point you have to go in the office with your ID to be run through the computer. And so when they were sent back to Canada, Canada Customs asked them, had they left their vehicle in the United States, to which they appropriately answered, yes, I had to go into the secondary office and show my ID. And our government promptly put them into a 14-day quarantine because they left their vehicle in the United States. And so there are some real punitive things, and just, I would just call it dumb decision making. I mean, it's you know, there's rules, but then there's common sense, and you expect people to be able to sort through, you know, in a reasonable way how to deal with their friends and their neighbors. And so that took a life of its own as well. And then you've had inconsistent policy approaches with respect to cross-border vaccinations, and you know, frustrations there between Alberta and Montana, and us trying to do it here, and the big push. But listen, at the end of the day, I can't believe if it goes past July 21st, the Delta variant better have taken strong hold and be, you know, rampant throughout both countries to justify, and God, I hope that doesn't happen.
Right, but that would be the magnitude of what would prevent it from happening.
I can't see the public here supporting the ongoing closure past that period of time.
Mayor Restaino, you had showed us the New York State pass on your phone to show you were inoculated. Most Americans have a easily forged piece of cardboard. So what do you think? Does that hold some promise for perhaps giving us all a tool?
You know, Mayor Rosenquest said it. New York State has followed the science throughout all of this. We've had phased reopenings. We have phased ourselves from a complete shutdown to now, by and large, with very few limits, everything is back open again and is open at full capacity. I just think following Mayor Dilkens' thought. I think that phasing this in is sensible. I think that as you take a look at the category of travelers and you center this around being fully vaccinated, the capacity to have technology that will help both customs sides be comfortable with the information that they're going to be looking at, that this is a way for us to move forward. Do I think on July 21st, the floodgates will open and everybody will be back to the way it was in 2019? Of course not. I would love it, but of course not. But I do think that what's currently happening is very frustrating, because I know, particularly in New York State, we have spent an awful lot of time incentivizing getting vaccines. And what a way to incentivize vaccines, but to say, once you're in that category, you can come to Sammy's and have wings. You can go to the Thai restaurant if you want. Do those things that made your life the way it was before all of this happened. So for me, now seeing the Canadian Pass, I downloaded it the other day as soon as I saw that it was available. I know that it's being updated to take care of the information regarding COVID vaccines. But once that's up and running, to me, we have technology that'll get us through. Let's open up the categories and start phasing this in.
Would either of you other mayors like to add on? Mayor
Yeah,
Rosenquest?
absolutely. And that's the thing is, we've been asking for that type of plan. We have been asking, we just want measurable results or measurable statistics that we can say, if we reach this threshold, then we can open the border at this capacity. And that's what we've been asking for from the beginning. That's what our state representatives have been asking for. Our federal representatives just have not been responding to that type of opening procedure. But yeah, you know, I think I'm in line with everybody, is that we would love to just open the border, but realistically, you know, and for safety reasons, we also know that that's not quite reasonable. But still, you know, when we look at 70%, over 70% of our population having the first vaccination and relying on the science that we've seen in New York State, we are 100% open right now. You know, it just makes sense to begin that process sooner than later.
One of the interesting things in Washington, and then I'll turn to you, Mayor Diodati, is that once the administration got a handle on getting the vaccine out to so many Americans, especially vulnerable older Americans, they could start a conversation about getting aid out to less developed countries. But that conversation, which is, from my perspective as someone who worked on humanitarian aid for years, that is crucial, but it kind of hopped over the discussion about getting more vaccine into Canada. So I'm hoping that, you know, the folks in whatever interagency group in DC is looking at pushing the vaccine that's produced in the US out to the rest of the world is also cognizant that everybody needs it. It's not, you know, those that can pay for it and those who will need assistance to pay for it. Mayor Diodati.
Well, thank you. And first off, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Mayor Rosenquest's excellent French. So I just wanted to let you know we appreciate that. So now there's pressure on me and Mayor Dilkens to speak some Spanish. So short of cerveza, you know, I don't have a lot of choices of words. He made mention that just he knows what he knows from Dora the Explorer. So I thought that was kind of funny. But myself, you know, we've got the world's longest unmilitarized border. You know, I've got my good friend, Mayor Restaino, who, you know, Mayor Restaino's former life was as a judge. He used to be a judge and an attorney. And he's used to seeing both sides and making the arguments. And I have to say, I think we are looking at all sides. We're trying to be pragmatic. We're trying to understand what the issues and concerns are. And Mayor Dilkens made reference to Minister Blair, our public safety minister, and he had given us some benchmarks. And this has been the most frustrating part. We said, what are the targets? What are the benchmarks? How will we know if we hit them if you don't tell us where they are? And if you tell us where they are, we'll work together to hitting them. And it just seems they keep moving the goalpost. So right when you think you're about, I feel like I'm Charlie Brown, you know, every time I go to kick the ball, they move it. And so we're saying, tell us where the ball is, tell us where the field goals are. Let us just the goalposts are, let us know so that we can actually have a shot at this. So Minister Blair had suggested that by July 21st, Canada should be 75% fully vaccinated. So we're on target for being there around about that time. So I think most people would say that's a pretty good number to be at. And I appreciate what was said about the Delta variant, and we're doing the right thing. It's not getting a stronghold. So what we would love to see is the plan. And I understand plans change. Show us the plan, be transparent about it. I mean, if I planned a trip to Plattsburgh, along the way, there might be construction, there might be congestion, I might get a flat tire, but it starts with a plan. And I'll amend as I go. So share the plan with all of us. And who better than your foot soldiers at the border? We know what's going on at the border better than anybody in Washington or in Ottawa. Talk to us. We're your frontline people, your boots on the ground. So that's what we're asking for, is a plan that we can work toward and plan for, because you don't just flip a switch and say the border's open. The border people need a lot of planning. They need to be ready if they need testing kits, whatever it is they need. So share with us the plan. And if it has to be amended, but don't once a month kick the can down, another month, another month, another month. So none of the businesses, none of the people, the employees, nobody can prepare properly for when they're going to be able to go to that wedding, visit that hospital, go to that funeral home, go see that restaurant. Like, we can't plan when they're not sharing all the information. So that's my suggestion, is share the plan. Let's all weigh in on it. And then hopefully we can all row the boat together and get to where we want to get to quicker.
And where is the key node where decisions ought to be made? Mayor Diodati, where's the holdup, do you think?
Well, there's no question it's federally, because federally makes the decisions for what's going to happen at the borders. And I know the US has been ready, and they're waiting for us to catch up with our vaccines, which we're doing. And the US has been doing a great job supplying us. Matter of fact, I got to watch Governor Cuomo firing off fireworks a while back when they hit the 70% mark, and turning the falls, certain colors to commemorate the milestone. And we're so happy about it, because we see it as we're getting one step closer to opening up the border. So the two sides need to get together. And I really believe it's political. And I think they need to get out of the way. And the science has given us a plan. Now the politicians need to endorse the plan and share with us what it's going to be, so we can all prepare for the opening, so we can get life back to normal with our number one trading partner. We've been neighbors for forever and a day. And I think we set a great example for the rest of the world, how you play nice together in the sandbox, except we're not allowed to play in each other's sandboxes right now. So we understand it's got to be done safely. We've come up with the ideals around safely reopening the border gradually and starting with fully vaccinated people. And I like the way Mayor Restaino said, you want an incentive? Once you're fully vaccinated, you can go watch the Blue Jays play in downtown Buffalo, or you can go to Sammy's to have your chicken wings, or you can do whatever it is that you like to do. I know my parents, Way of Life, every Thursday, they go shopping in Niagara Falls, New York, and then they go out for dinner. Every Thursday, that's been their tradition for decades. And they can't wait to get back to that tradition of what we've always loved to do. And that's the beauty of living on a border. I can tell you, for me, I fly out of Buffalo much more readily than flying out of Toronto. It's a lot easier. I just as soon go see a Sabres game than a Toronto Maple Leafs game. I love to watch the Buffalo Bills. I love NFL football. And it's so much living on the border. I grew up before cable TV, we had antennas, and I listened to all the Buffalo stations, and I knew all the burbs, Cheektowaga, Lackawanna, Tonawanda, like all the places. I grew up. I knew Irv Weinstein. I knew everything, all the TV reporters. I mean, that was my life growing up. And I feel like I've had one of my arms cut off. It's not a good feeling. And I certainly hope that we're going to move the ball forward and get our federal counterparts to talk and share the plan.
We have about 70 folks who have been listening in on this, and we're also recording your discussion. So we'll make sure to get that out as wide as possible, because I really feel that your witness, your testimony today is so valuable, because you speak from your knowledge of the neighborhoods and the fellow citizens in these towns and cities. Another thing to do, though, for people who are advocates and activists is to try to raise some of these issues with key policymakers. And so let's wind up our discussion today. I just would like a 2-minute final alert from the four of you, if you will, on what you think the headlines are that should be raised to folks in Ottawa and in Washington, D.C. And we'll have that then on tape, and we'll see if we can, raise some of these issues up then in terms of op-eds and conversations on both sides of the border. Mayor Dilkens?
Quite simple, reignite business and reunite families. And that's the message I would leave for my community.
Thank you, Mayor Restaino.
I would agree that it's important for, we have small business that's struggling. And if we're going to stabilize local economies, small business has to survive, and small business survives when you allow, this free, we have the advantage as border communities, we have the advantage of being able to look really outside of our own place. Our friends and neighbors from Niagara Falls, Ontario, it's not like I'm going out looking for foreign investment. I have friends and neighbors who frequent our places and enjoy our community. So small business needs to have the federal governments get it right and get it right quickly.
Mayor Diodati?
I'd like to see the headline read, July 21st proposed border opening date for fully vaccinated Canadians and Americans. So it'll fully incentivize everyone to go out and get vaccinated, give everybody lots of time to plan for the opening, and remove the excuses that we've had. That's what I'd like to see as the headline tomorrow.
Mayor Rosenquest, why don't you have the last word for our discussion this morning?
Thank you. The headline and the message for me is simple. We're the ones on the ground. We're the ones that see the day-to-day impact from not seeing our neighbors to the north, from not having that business community share across the border. Give us some guidelines. Let us fulfill those guidelines. Let us help with this process, and let us open this border sooner than later.
I want to give my heartfelt thanks to the four of you. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We're going to take, I think it's about a half-hour break before the next panel, and we've got an interesting lineup that will go deeper into these issues and from different academic analyses as well for the next couple of hours. We'll also be hearing more about how the border is affecting people in Washington State and further west. As a native New Yorker, though, I think this was the ideal panel. So thank you all very, very much. And I look forward to Mayor Diodati and I will be doing a tour of the border areas once it's fully open. And I believe there's a distillery in Windsor, Canada that we have our eye on. If invited, we'll be headed that way. Right, Jim?
Oh, yeah. Mayor Dilkens takes the Minister of Tourism there regularly, but I've yet to get the invite. So I'm still checking my mailbox every day.
Okay, thank you to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Nice job.